Zekthara stared at the assignment data floating before his elongated face and felt nothing but mild annoyance. Another reconnaissance mission to another backwater species that had somehow stumbled into galactic politics. The Kethmori officer had done this type of work dozens of times before, watching primitive civilizations make their first clumsy attempts at interstellar warfare. It was always the same story with predictable endings. The humans had joined the Galactic Confederation only 3 cycles ago, barely enough time to understand basic hyperspace navigation, let alone the complex art of space combat. Now they found themselves facing the Vorthan Empire, a military machine that had conquered 17 star systems in the last decade alone. The outcome seemed so obvious that Zekthara wondered why the Confederation bothered with formal observation at all. Commander Velcrum entered the briefing chamber with the familiar clicking of his crystalline exoskeleton against the metal floor. His 4 eyes focused on Zekthara with the cold efficiency that made the Kethmori such excellent military analysts. There was no emotion in his voice when he spoke, just the clear transmission of necessary information. The humans have established colonies in the Kepler sector, Velcrum said, activating a holographic display that showed the disputed region. 3 mining stations, 2 agricultural worlds, and 1 research facility. The Vorthans have already begun probing attacks on the outer settlements. Zekthara examined the tactical display with practiced detachment. The human positions were scattered across too much space with insufficient defensive coverage. Their patrol fleets were small and used outdated technology purchased from other Confederation members. The research facility appeared to be their only strategic asset, and it was positioned in the most vulnerable location possible. Standard defensive posture, Zekthara observed, manipulating the hologram to show probable attack vectors. They have positioned their forces to protect economic assets rather than strategic choke points. The Vorthans will likely begin with harassment raids before launching a full assault on the research station. That matches our tactical assessment, Velcrum agreed. The humans have requested military assistance from the Confederation, but the Council needs detailed combat evaluations before committing resources. Your mission is to observe and record all military encounters between human and Vorthan forces. The assignment seemed straightforward enough, but Zekthara noticed something unusual in the mission parameters. His observation period was scheduled to last significantly longer than typical reconnaissance assignments. Most species either proved themselves worthy of Confederation support or were conquered within a few engagements. The extended timeline suggested someone expected the humans to provide more resistance than their technology indicated. Are there any special considerations for this assignment? Zekthara asked, though he already suspected the answer. The humans have demonstrated some unusual characteristics in their preliminary conflicts, Velcrum replied carefully. Nothing that changes the tactical assessment, but enough to warrant extended observation. Your cloaking technology will allow you to monitor their activities without detection. Zekthara accepted the mission data and began preparations for departure. His ship, the Silent Observer, was equipped with the most advanced stealth systems available to Confederation intelligence services. The vessel could maintain complete invisibility while recording detailed sensor data from close range. It was perfect for watching civilizations destroy themselves without interference. The journey to human space took 12 standard days, giving Zekthara time to study the available intelligence files. The humans had evolved on a planet with unusually harsh conditions, requiring them to develop remarkable adaptability just to survive. Their psychology showed interesting patterns of cooperation and competition that seemed to contradict each other. They formed strong social bonds while simultaneously engaging in constant internal conflicts. Their military technology was indeed primitive by galactic standards, but their tactical thinking showed some creative elements. Human commanders seemed to favor mobility over firepower, often using smaller forces to achieve objectives that other species would approach with overwhelming strength. It was an interesting approach, though ultimately futile against the Vorthan Empire's superior numbers and technology. As the Silent Observer entered the Kepler sector, Zekthara began detecting the first signs of conflict. Long-range sensors picked up debris fields from recent skirmishes, along with the energy signatures of ships moving in patrol patterns. The humans had established a defensive perimeter around their colonies, but it was full of gaps that any competent military force could exploit. The first human vessel Zekthara encountered was a patrol ship commanded by someone called Captain Jake Morrison. The ship was smaller than most civilian transports, armed with weapons that would barely damage a Vorthan corvette. Morrison's crew consisted of only 8 individuals, yet they were patrolling a sector that should have required at least 3 times their number. Lieutenant Amy Foster appeared to be coordinating defensive preparations at the largest mining station. Her communications indicated that she was converting industrial equipment for military use, a common practice among desperate civilizations. The station's defenses consisted of mining lasers and improvised barriers that would provide little protection. Against a serious assault, everything Zekthara observed confirmed the initial assessment. The humans were brave but hopelessly outmatched. Their technology was inadequate, their numbers insufficient, and their positions poorly chosen. The Vorthans would make short work of them once they committed to a full offensive. The Kethmori. Observers settled into a monitoring position near the outer edge of the system and began recording data. Within a few days, the first major engagement would begin, and Zekthara would witness another young species learn the harsh realities of galactic warfare. It was just another assignment in a long career of watching civilizations fail. The attack came at dawn, Galactic Standard Time, just as Zekthara had predicted. 3 Vorthan assault ships dropped out of hyperspace near the mining station where Lieutenant Amy Foster was coordinating defenses. The Kethmori observer adjusted his sensors to record the coming massacre with clinical detachment. The Vorthan ships were sleek predators, each one capable of destroying the mining station with a single concentrated barrage. Their commanders followed standard doctrine, approaching in formation while charging their primary weapons. Zekthara had seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times before with other species. The humans would panic, attempt a desperate defense, and then surrender or die. Amy Foster's voice crackled across the communication channels as she coordinated the station's response. Her tone was calm and professional, showing no sign of the terror that should have paralyzed her in the face of overwhelming force. She was directing technicians to modify mining equipment while ordering workers to evacuate to predetermined shelter areas. The first surprise came when the mining station's industrial lasers suddenly pivoted toward the approaching Vorthan ships. These weren't weapons designed for combat, but tools meant to cut through asteroids and extract valuable minerals. Amy had somehow reconfigured their targeting systems and power output to function as defensive batteries. The Vorthan commander must have been confused by the energy readings because his ships hesitated for several seconds before resuming their attack approach. That hesitation proved costly when the first mining laser fired at maximum power, striking the lead assault ship's shields with unexpected force. The blast didn't penetrate the Vorthan defenses, but it was strong enough to cause visible shield fluctuations. Zekthara leaned forward in his observation chair, suddenly more interested in the proceedings. Industrial lasers shouldn't have been able to affect military-grade shielding at all. Either the human modifications were more sophisticated than expected, or the Vorthans were using inferior shield generators. Neither possibility made sense. According to his intelligence files, the second surprise came when cargo containers began launching from the mining station's freight bays. Amy had somehow converted the station's cargo handling system into a mass driver, hurling containers filled with raw ore at the Vorthan ships. The containers were moving at incredible velocity, far faster than standard freight operations should allow. The Vorthan commander tried to evade the incoming projectiles, but his ships were too close and moving too fast to change course effectively. The first container struck the lead ship's port side, causing significant hull damage despite the active shields. The second container hit the trailing ship's engine section, completely disabling its primary propulsion. This was impossible. Cargo containers were civilian equipment, not military weapons. The kinetic energy required to damage shielded warships through simple impact should have been beyond the capacity of any freight handling system. Yet somehow Amy Foster had found a way to make it work. The third surprise came when Captain Jake Morrison's patrol ship appeared behind the Vorthen formation. His tiny vessel should have been detected long before it could reach attack position, but somehow he had managed to approach unnoticed. His ship's weapons were still inadequate for serious combat, but he wasn't trying to destroy the Vorthen ships. Instead, Morrison launched a spread of what appeared to be standard missiles toward the disabled Vorthen vessel. The missiles struck the ship's hull and immediately began releasing clouds of metallic particles. Within seconds, the Vorthen ship's sensors were completely blinded by the expanding cloud of chaff and debris. The fourth surprise came when more human ships began appearing throughout the system. These weren't military vessels, but converted civilian craft that had somehow avoided detection by Vorthen sensors. Freighters, mining ships, and even passenger transports were converging on the battle zone from multiple directions. Each civilian vessel had been modified in ways that defied conventional thinking. A freight hauler was using its cargo bay as a missile launcher. A passenger liner had somehow converted its life support system into a jamming array. A mining ship was firing clouds of processed or that interfered with Vorthen targeting systems. The Vorthen commander tried to maintain formation discipline, but his ships were being attacked from too many directions by weapons that shouldn't have existed. His tactical computers couldn't process the threat assessment data because the human weapons didn't match any known configuration in their databases. Amy Foster's voice continued to coordinate the defense, directing the improvised fleet with precision that suggested months of planning rather than desperate improvisation. She was treating industrial equipment like military hardware, using mining techniques as combat tactics, and somehow making it all work together. The fifth surprise came when Commander Lisa Hayes led a boarding party toward the damaged Vorthen ship. Her team was using modified maintenance pods to approach the enemy vessel, equipment that was never designed for combat operations. The pods were too small and too slow to be effective assault vehicles, yet they were somehow avoiding the Vorthen point defense systems. Hayes and her team reached the Vorthen ship's hull and began cutting through the armor with industrial tools. They were using the same equipment that Amy had employed to modify the mining station, but now they were applying it to breach military-grade defenses. The cutting process should have taken hours, but the human tools were somehow working with impossible efficiency. Within minutes, the boarding party had penetrated the Vorthen ship's interior. Hayes was leading her team through corridors designed for a completely different species, using human adaptability to navigate alien architecture. They were learning to operate Vorthen technology in real time, figuring out control systems that should have required years of study. The battle ended with the complete capture of 2 Vorthen assault ships and the destruction of the third. The humans had achieved victory using nothing but modified civilian equipment and tactical thinking that violated every principle of conventional warfare. Zekthara sat in stunned silence, reviewing the recorded data with growing amazement. Everything he had witnessed was impossible according to established military doctrine, yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had somehow found ways to make inadequate technology perform beyond its design parameters. This wasn't just luck or desperation. The humans had demonstrated systematic creativity in converting civilian resources into military assets. They had shown tactical flexibility that allowed them to adapt to changing conditions in real time. Most importantly, they had proven capable of learning alien technology fast enough to use it effectively in combat. The Kethmori observer began to suspect that his assignment would be far more interesting than originally anticipated. The news of the mining station victory spread through Vorthen command faster than Zekthara expected. Within 2 standard days, a full invasion fleet was assembling near the edge of human space. The Kethmori observer counted 47 warships, including 3 heavy cruisers that could reduce entire planets to ash. This was no longer a simple raid, but a full military response to what the Vorthens clearly saw as an unacceptable humiliation. Zekthara followed the fleet as it moved toward New Kansas, an agricultural world that housed nearly 2 million human colonists. The planet had minimal defenses and no strategic value beyond food production. It was exactly the kind of target the Vorthons preferred for demonstrating their power to rebellious species. Colonel Ben Parker commanded the planetary defense forces, though calling them forces was generous. His military assets consisted of 12 outdated fighters, 6 patrol boats, and whatever weapons could be improvised from farming equipment. Against a fleet of 47 warships, the defense should have lasted approximately 15 minutes. The Vorthon Fleet Admiral clearly expected quick victory because he broadcast surrender demands before beginning the assault. His message was standard procedure, offering the humans a chance to submit peacefully before facing complete destruction. The response from Colonel Parker was equally predictable, a polite refusal that sealed the planet's fate. What happened next? Made Zekthara question the accuracy of his observation equipment. As the Vorthon fleet entered the system, the planet's agricultural infrastructure began transforming itself into a military installation. Irrigation systems became defensive networks, crop harvesters turned into mobile weapons platforms, and grain silos opened to reveal hidden missile batteries. The transformation was happening too fast to be improvised. The humans had been planning this defense for weeks, converting their farming equipment into weapons while maintaining the appearance of peaceful agricultural activity. Every piece of civilian machinery had been designed with dual purposes that weren't apparent until they were needed. Dr. Maria Santos was coordinating the biological defense systems from a research station that should have been evacuated days ago. Instead of fleeing, she was working with samples of local plant life to create countermeasures against Vorthon bioweapons. Her laboratory was using agricultural chemistry to develop military applications that shouldn't have been possible. The first Vorthon landing craft touched down in what appeared to be an undefended farming region. The soldiers expected to encounter terrified civilians and minimal resistance. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by farmers, who moved like trained soldiers and fought with weapons that looked like farming tools but functioned like military equipment. Sergeant Tim Rodriguez was leading one of these civilian units, men and women who had been growing crops just days earlier. His people were using modified tractors as assault vehicles, wielding harvesting blades as close combat weapons, and throwing fertilizer compounds that exploded like grenades. They were fighting with the desperate efficiency of people defending their homes. The Vorthon ground forces had superior armor and weapons, but they were facing an enemy that knew every field, every barn, and every irrigation ditch on the planet. The humans were using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to create ambush points and escape routes that didn't exist on any tactical map. Meanwhile, the orbital battle was developing into something that defied every principle of space combat. The human patrol boats were using the planet's gravity well to slingshot themselves at impossible velocities, turning their small size into an advantage by becoming nearly impossible to target. They were firing weapons that appeared to be modified mining charges, creating explosions that damaged Vorthon shields through sheer kinetic force. The grain silos were launching missiles that shouldn't have existed, projectiles that moved too fast and hit too hard to be civilian equipment. Colonel Parker had somehow convinced the agricultural corporations to help him convert food storage facilities into hidden weapons depots. The missiles were filled with locally produced chemicals that created exotic reactions when they struck. Vorthon hull plating. The most disturbing development was the way the humans were adapting to Vorthon tactics in real time. Every time the alien forces tried a new approach, the human defenders found a countermeasure within hours. They were learning from each encounter and sharing that knowledge across the entire defense network with impossible speed. Dr. Santos released clouds of genetically modified spores that specifically targeted Vorthon respiratory systems. Her bioweapons were created from common farming bacteria, modified to be harmless to humans but lethal to the alien invaders. She was using agricultural science to conduct biological warfare with materials that any farming world would have in abundance. The civilian population was proving to be as dangerous as the military forces. Farmers were using their knowledge of soil composition to create improvised explosives. Agricultural workers were modifying pesticide sprayers into chemical weapons. Even children were contributing by using their small size to plant explosives. In places where adult soldiers couldn't reach, Zekthara watched the battle develop with growing amazement. The humans weren't just fighting with superior tactics or better weapons. They were demonstrating a level of species-wide coordination that suggested every individual was willing to sacrifice everything for the common defense. This wasn't military discipline, but something far more dangerous. The Vorthan fleet. Admiral was clearly becoming frustrated with his force's lack of progress. He had expected to conquer the planet within hours, but his ground troops were bogged down in endless skirmishes with an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. His orbital bombardment was being disrupted by defensive systems that shouldn't have existed. Colonel Parker's voice could be heard on communication channels throughout the system, coordinating a defense that involved every human on the planet. He was treating farmers like soldiers, scientists like weapons specialists, and civilians like military assets. More importantly, all of these people were responding as if they had been trained for this their entire lives. The impossible was becoming routine. Humans were achieving victories that violated every law of military science, using weapons that shouldn't work and tactics that couldn't succeed. They were turning every disadvantage into an advantage and finding ways to win battles that should have been hopeless. As the third day of fighting began, Zekthara realized that something fundamental was changing in his understanding of warfare. The humans weren't just defending their planet. They were demonstrating that the rules of galactic conflict might not apply to them at all. The failure at New Kansas sent shockwaves through the Vorthan Empire that reached all the way to their core worlds. Zekthara intercepted military communications filled with confusion and growing anger. The Vorthans had lost over half their invasion fleet to a species they considered primitive, and their military leadership was demanding explanations that no one could provide. What came next surprised even Zekthara, who thought he was beginning to understand human unpredictability. Instead of celebrating their defensive victory and preparing for the next Vorthan assault, the humans launched their own offensive deep into enemy territory. Admiral Kate Sullivan was leading a fleet of 37 ships toward the Vorthan military stronghold at Kepler Station. The numbers were absurd. Sullivan's fleet was outnumbered by more than 50 to 1, facing defensive installations that had never been successfully attacked in over 2 centuries. The Vorthan fortress contained enough firepower to destroy entire star systems, protected by shield generators that could withstand sustained bombardment from multiple fleets. Zekthara followed the human fleet as it moved through hyperspace, expecting to witness the most spectacular military disaster in recorded galactic history. The humans were clearly suffering from victory syndrome, allowing their recent successes to cloud their judgment about what was actually possible in warfare. Admiral Sullivan's tactical briefings revealed a plan that made no sense according to CONVIANTIO military thinking. Instead of attempting to fight their way through the Vorthan defenses, the humans were planning to capture the station intact. They intended to turn the fortress against its own creators, using Vorthan technology to destroy other Vorthan installations. The approach to Kepler Station began with the humans doing something that should have been impossible. They split their already inadequate fleet into smaller groups, spreading their forces across multiple attack vectors. Each group contained only 4 or 5 ships, numbers that wouldn't have been sufficient to challenge a single Vorthan patrol vessel. Commander Alex Turner was leading the primary assault group directly toward the station's main docking bay. His ships were broadcasting fake surrender signals while hiding their true intentions behind electronic warfare systems that somehow fooled the Vorthan sensors. The aliens were so confident in their defensive superiority that they didn't suspect the approaching ships might be planning anything other than capitulation. The second group was commanded by Captain Nancy Robinson, whose ships were approaching from the station's blind side using a course that took them through an asteroid field. The Vorthans had never bothered to defend that approach because navigating through the asteroids required piloting skills that most species didn't possess. The humans were using their ships like fighter craft, weaving between space rocks with precision that defied their vessels' size and mass. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Harris was leading the third group on what appeared to be a suicide mission directly at the station's heaviest weapons batteries. His ships were too small and too few to survive contact with the fortress's main guns, but they weren't trying to destroy the weapons. Instead, they were using the Vorthan targeting systems against themselves, flying patterns that forced the automated defenses to fire at their own installations. The fourth group consisted of only 2 ships under the command of Major Chris Taylor, but they were carrying something that made Zekthara's sensors register unusual energy signatures. The humans had somehow acquired and modified Vorthan technology, creating weapons that the fortress's defensive systems wouldn't recognize as threats. Until it was too late, the assault began with Turner's group docking at the station as if they were actually surrendering. The Vorthans were so surprised by this apparent capitulation that they allowed the human ships to attach to their docking ports without resistance. Only when armed humans began pouring out of the vessels did the aliens realize they had been deceived. The humans weren't trying to capture the station through conventional assault. They were infiltrating it like a virus, using their smaller numbers and superior mobility to spread throughout the facility faster than the Vorthans could respond. Turner's people were capturing key systems and turning them against the station's own defenses. Robinson's group struck the asteroid-side docking bays at the same moment, but they weren't bringing soldiers. Instead, they were deploying teams of technicians who immediately began interfacing with Vorthan computer systems. The humans were attempting to hack alien technology in real time, learning to operate systems that should have required years of study. Harris's ships were drawing fire from the station's main batteries while broadcasting detailed sensor data about the weapons, locations, and capabilities. The humans were using themselves as bait to gather intelligence, accepting casualties to learn how the Vorthan defenses operated. Every ship that was destroyed provided data that made the next attack more effective. Taylor's modified weapons struck the station's shield generators with energy signatures that bypassed the defensive systems entirely. The humans had somehow reverse-engineered Vorthan technology and improved it, creating weapons that were more effective against Vorthan defenses than the originals. Within 6 hours, the humans had captured the most heavily defended military installation in Vorthan space. They had accomplished this impossible feat not through superior firepower or numbers, but through tactical thinking that transformed every disadvantage into an advantage. The fortress that had protected Vorthan territory for centuries was now under human control. The most disturbing aspect of the victory was how quickly the humans adapted to operating the captured station. Within hours, they were using Vorthan weapons more effectively than the Vorthans themselves. They were reprogramming alien computer systems, modifying defensive protocols, and turning the fortress into a base for further operations. Zekthara watched Admiral Sullivan coordinate the occupation of Kepler Station with growing amazement. The humans weren't just using captured equipment, they were improving it. Their modifications were making Vorthan technology more efficient, more powerful, and more adaptable than the original designs. The strategic implications were staggering. The humans had demonstrated that they could not only defeat superior forces, but could also assimilate and enhance alien technology faster than anyone thought possible. They were proving that the rules of galactic warfare didn't apply to them because they were constantly creating new rules. The Kathmori observer realized that his species' analytical approach to conflict was becoming obsolete. The humans weren't following predictable patterns or logical strategies. They were improvising solutions to impossible problems and somehow making those solutions work consistently. As reports of the station's capture spread through both human and Vorthan space, Zekthara began to understand that he was witnessing more than military victories. The humans were demonstrating a fundamental difference in how they approached conflict, survival and adaptation that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The capture of Kepler Station marked the beginning of something that Zekthara had never witnessed in his long career of observing galactic conflicts. The humans didn't stop with their impossible victory, but used it as a launching point for an assault on the Vorthan core worlds themselves. General Patricia Webb was assembling a combined fleet that included not only human vessels but also captured Vorthan ships operated by human crews. The strategic audacity was breathtaking. The humans were planning to attack the Vorthan homeworld of Vorth Prime, a planet that had never been successfully invaded in the 3,000-year history of the Empire. The world was protected by 17 orbital defense platforms, each one capable of destroying entire fleets, surrounded by minefields that stretched across multiple planetary orbits. Zekthara calculated the odds of success and found them so low that his analytical systems registered the attempt as statistically impossible. The humans would be facing not just the orbital defenses, but also the entire Vorthan home fleet, nearly 400 warships that included some of the most advanced vessels in galactic space, yet General Webb was proceeding with preparations as if victory was merely a matter of proper planning. Her briefings revealed an understanding of Vorthan psychology and military doctrine that seemed impossibly detailed. The humans had learned more about their enemies in a few months of fighting than most species discovered in decades of peaceful contact. Major Chris Taylor was leading the ground assault forces that would somehow have to overcome planetary defenses designed to repel invasion armies numbering in the millions. His troops consisted of fewer than 50,000 soldiers equipped with a mixture of human and captured Vorthan equipment. They were planning to conquer a planet defended by over 2 billion military personnel. The assault began with something that made Zekthara question everything he thought he understood about space warfare. Instead of attacking the orbital platforms directly, the human fleet started broadcasting what appeared to be surrender negotiations. General Webb was offering to discuss terms for ending the conflict, requesting safe passage to approach the planet for diplomatic talks. The Vorthans were suspicious but intrigued by the possibility of forcing human surrender without having to fight for it. They allowed Webb's fleet to approach within the outer defensive perimeter while maintaining weapons locks on every human vessel. The aliens were confident that they could destroy the entire human force within minutes if the negotiations proved to be a deception. What happened next demonstrated human tactical thinking at its most creative. Captain Nancy Robinson was commanding a group of ships that appeared to be diplomatic vessels but were actually mobile factories. While the negotiations continued, these ships were manufacturing thousands of small devices that looked like communication relays but functioned as something entirely different. The devices were being deployed throughout the Vorthan defensive network under the pretense of establishing secure communication channels for the diplomatic talks. The Vorthans allowed this because the devices appeared harmless, and the humans claimed they were necessary for preventing misunderstandings that could lead to accidental conflict. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Harris was coordinating ground operations from what appeared to be a command ship but was actually a mobile invasion platform. His vessel contained specialized equipment for rapid planetary assault, disguised as diplomatic communication gear. The humans were preparing for immediate ground deployment while maintaining the fiction of peaceful negotiations. The transformation happened so quickly that the Vorthans had no time to respond effectively. The communication devices revealed themselves to be sophisticated jamming systems that disrupted the coordination between orbital platforms. The diplomatic vessels opened to release swarms of small craft that immediately began attacking critical system nodes throughout the defensive network. Harris's ground forces were already deploying to the planet's surface before the Vorthans realized that the negotiations had been an elaborate deception. The humans were using drop pods disguised as diplomatic shuttles, landing in locations that had been identified during the approach phase as weak points in the planetary defense grid. The most remarkable aspect of the assault was how the humans coordinated their attacks across multiple theaters simultaneously. They were fighting orbital battles while conducting ground operations, while maintaining cyber warfare against Vorthan computer systems. Every action supported every other action in ways that created cascading failures throughout the enemy defense. Major Taylor's ground forces weren't trying to capture territory in the conventional sense. Instead, they were targeting the psychological foundations of Vorthan resistance. His soldiers were broadcasting messages in perfect Vorthan language, offering surrender terms that were more generous than the aliens had ever received from any enemy. The humans had learned that Vorthan society was built on the assumption of military superiority. When that assumption was challenged by impossible human victories, the entire foundation of their civilization began to crack. Taylor's forces were exploiting this weakness by demonstrating that continued resistance would only result in more impossible defeats. Dr. Maria Santos had somehow made her way to the planet's surface and was working with local Vorthan scientists to develop solutions to problems that the war had created. She was treating former enemies as colleagues, using their knowledge to help repair damage that the conflict had caused to civilian populations. The ground fighting was unlike anything Zekthara had observed in his studies of galactic warfare. The humans weren't trying to kill every enemy soldier, but were instead offering alternatives to continued fighting. They were demonstrating that surrender led to better treatment than most Vorthans received from their own government. Captain Robinson's ships were providing orbital support that selectively targeted military installations while carefully avoiding civilian areas. The humans were fighting a war of precision that minimized collateral damage while maximizing psychological impact. They were showing the Vorthan population that human victory meant liberation rather than conquest. Within 72 hours, the Vorthan government was requesting terms for ending the war. The humans had achieved in 3 days what should have required years of fighting and millions of casualties. They had conquered the most heavily defended world in the galaxy by convincing its defenders that resistance was futile. General Webb's response to the surrender request revealed the true nature of human strategic thinking. She wasn't demanding unconditional capitulation, but was offering partnership in creating a new kind of galactic civilization. The humans wanted to transform their enemies into allies rather than simply defeating them. Zekthara realized that he was witnessing the emergence of a species that would fundamentally change the nature of galactic politics. The humans weren't just superior warriors, but were demonstrating new approaches to conflict resolution that made traditional conquest obsolete. The war was ending not with the destruction of the Vorthan Empire, but with its transformation into something unprecedented in galactic history. The war ended not with destruction, but with transformation, and Zekthara found himself struggling to understand what that meant for the galaxy. The Vorthan Empire had formally surrendered, but the humans were treating the defeated aliens as partners rather than conquered enemies. General Webb was working with former Vorthan military leaders to establish new forms of government that combined human adaptability with Vorthan organizational skills. The changes were happening faster than anyone thought possible. Former Vorthan worlds were requesting to join the Human Alliance, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted access to human technology and thinking. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was now eagerly learning from the newcomers who had defeated them so completely. Zekthara spent weeks reviewing the recorded data from his observation mission, trying to compile a report that would make sense to the Galactic Confederation leadership. Every analysis led to the same impossible conclusion. The humans had rewritten the fundamental rules of warfare. By refusing to accept that any situation was truly hopeless, the technical specifications were clear enough. Human technology remained inferior to most galactic standards, but their ability to modify and improve existing systems was unmatched. They could take equipment designed for one purpose and adapt it for completely different functions within hours. More importantly, they could teach these skills to other species with remarkable efficiency. Captain Jake Morrison was now commanding a mixed fleet of human and former Vorthan vessels, with crews that included members of both species working together, as if they had been allies for years. The integration was proceeding so smoothly that it seemed natural rather than forced. The humans had somehow convinced their former enemies that cooperation was more beneficial than continued conflict. Lieutenant Amy Foster had been promoted to oversee the integration of civilian populations on former Vorthan worlds. Her work involved teaching human techniques for converting civilian infrastructure to military use, but also showing how the same principles could be applied to peacetime development. She was demonstrating that human adaptability could create prosperity as effectively as it created victory. Dr. Maria Santos was leading joint research projects that combined human creativity with Vorthan scientific knowledge. The results were technological advances that neither species could have achieved alone. Her teams were developing medical treatments, agricultural improvements, and industrial processes that were already being adopted throughout the galaxy. The political implications were staggering. The Galactic Confederation was receiving requests from dozens of species who wanted to establish closer relationships with humanity. Everyone wanted access to human military advisors, human technology specialists, and human diplomatic expertise. The newcomers were becoming the most sought-after allies in galactic politics. Zekthara's own species was experiencing changes that made him uncomfortable. The Keth Mori had always prided themselves on emotional detachment and analytical thinking, but exposure to human methods was causing some of his people to question whether those approaches were actually superior. Young Keth Mori were requesting assignments to human space, eager to learn from the species that had accomplished so much in such a short time. The most disturbing aspect of the human transformation of galactic politics was how they were changing the definition of victory itself. Traditional conquest involved the defeat and subjugation of enemies, but the humans were demonstrating that converting enemies into allies was far more profitable. They were creating a new model of expansion based on cooperation rather than domination. Colonel Ben Parker was now working with former Vorthan agricultural specialists to develop farming techniques that could feed entire star systems. His defense of New Kansas had shown that civilian populations could be mobilized for military purposes, but the peacetime applications were proving even more valuable. He was teaching other species how to achieve food security and economic independence. Commander Alex Turner was leading exploration missions into previously unexplored regions of the galaxy, but his ships included crew members from multiple species who were learning human techniques for adapting to unknown challenges. The humans were sharing their greatest advantage, their ability to thrive in any environment. With anyone willing to learn, the transformation extended beyond military and political changes to something that affected the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now working together on projects that benefited everyone. The humans were serving as mediators, teachers, and partners in creating forms of cooperation that had never existed. Before Zekthara realized that his mission had become something entirely different from what was originally intended. He was no longer recording the military capabilities of a new species, but documenting the emergence of a civilization that would change everything about how galactic politics functioned. The Keth Mori observer found himself facing a choice that would have been unthinkable when his mission began. He could return to his homeworld and submit a report that would be classified and forgotten, or he could request permanent assignment to human space and continue learning from the species that had transformed his understanding of what was possible. The decision was easier than it should have been. Zekthara had been changed by witnessing human warfare, infected by human concepts of hope, sacrifice, and continuous improvement. He could no longer view conflicts as simple matters of statistics and tactical analysis because the humans had shown him that every situation contained possibilities that analytical thinking couldn't detect. His request for permanent assignment was approved within days, but not for the reasons he expected. The Confederation leadership wanted to maintain observers in human space not to gather intelligence about a potential threat but to learn from teachers who could help other species develop similar capabilities. The irony was perfect. Zekthara had been sent to watch humans fight and had learned that they were far more dangerous in peace than they had ever been in war. Their ability to transform enemies into allies, to find solutions to impossible problems, and to continuously adapt to new challenges made them the most valuable partners anyone could hope to acquire. The title of his final report would read exactly as his mission had been named, but the meaning had changed completely. He regretted going not because the assignment had been difficult or dangerous, but because witnessing human potential had made it impossible for him to return to his old way of thinking about the universe. The humans had won more than a war. They had demonstrated that victory could mean transformation rather than destruction, that strength could be measured by the ability to create rather than the capacity to destroy, and that the greatest conquest was convincing others to willingly become better versions of themselves. Zathara would spend the rest of his career learning from the species that had taught the galaxy what it meant to truly win.